I never believed in any of this, you know? I was one of those people who laugh when someone mentions UFOs or extraterrestrials. My life was simple. I worked at an auto parts factory in Querétaro, had my family, my friends, my Sunday soccer games and barbecues. But there was one night that changed me. Forever. A night when something showed me things I didn't even know I could imagine. I don't know if it was real. I don't know if it was a dream so vivid that my brain recorded it as memory. I don't know anything for certain. The only thing I know is that since that night I'm not the same, and every time I close my eyes, I see those images, hear that voice, feel that weight in my chest that tells me what I experienced was something bigger than me, bigger than all of us. I won't lie to you. There are days when I think I went crazy, that something broke in my head. But there are also days when I feel I was chosen to see something most people will never see, to understand at least a little piece of a mystery so immense it would drive us mad if we understood it completely. I'm telling you this because I need to get it out, because I've been carrying this alone for years, because maybe you too have felt at some point that there's something more, something we can't touch, but it's there, breathing alongside us, waiting. It all started on a Friday in October 2018. I remember the exact date because it was my comadre Lupita's birthday, and we'd been at her house until late, drinking beer and having a good time. I drove back to my house around 2 in the morning, a bit dizzy but conscious, through those lonely roads that surround the city. The sky was clear, full of stars like you rarely see, and I remember thinking it looked really beautiful, really peaceful. I put norteño music on the stereo, the kind I like to relax to, and focused on getting home to collapse in bed. But about halfway there, in a part where there's almost nothing but crop fields and the occasional isolated house, my truck's engine started making a strange noise. It wasn't the typical noise of when something mechanical fails. It was like a humming that came from everywhere at once, as if the air around was vibrating. I got scared, obviously, because my truck was my work tool and I couldn't afford for it to break down. I pulled over and got out to check, with my phone's flashlight shining on the engine. Everything looked normal, but the humming continued, getting louder and louder, and then I realized it wasn't coming from my truck at all. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. That thing that even now, years later, I can't fully describe with words that make sense. The sky above me had changed. Where there had been stars and darkness, now there was a light, but not like any light I'd ever seen before. It wasn't like the sun. It wasn't like a street light. It wasn't like a spotlight from a helicopter. It was a light that seemed alive, that pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, and it was so big that it covered almost the entire sky above me. I stood there frozen, my phone falling from my hand onto the dirt road, my mouth open like an idiot, unable to move or think or do anything except stare at that thing. The humming got so intense that I felt it, in my bones, in my teeth, in my chest, like when you stand too close to a speaker at a concert, but 1,000 times stronger. And then the light started descending, slowly, carefully, as if it knew I was there and didn't want to scare me more than I already was. I wanted to run, every fiber of my being screamed at me to get in my truck and floor it out of there, but I couldn't move. It was like my body wasn't mine anymore, like something was holding me there, making me watch, making me stay. As the light got closer, I started to see that it wasn't just light. There was a structure behind it, or inside it. I'm not sure how to explain it. It was like looking at something that existed in more dimensions than my eyes were built to see, something that my brain kept trying to make sense of, but couldn't quite grasp. The closest I can come to describing it is like a massive disc, but the edges weren't solid. They kind of blurred and shifted, and the surface had patterns that moved and changed like oil on water, showing colors I swear I'd never seen before in my life. Colors that don't have names, that don't exist in our world. I know how crazy that sounds. Believe me, I know, but I'm telling you what I saw, or what I think I saw, or what my mind interpreted from whatever the hell I was actually looking at. The thing descended until it was hovering maybe 50 feet above the ground, right over the field next to the road, and the air around it shimmered and twisted like heat waves on hot asphalt. All the sounds of the night had stopped. No crickets, no wind, no distant dogs barking, nothing but that humming that filled everything. And then I heard the voice. It wasn't a voice like yours or mine. It didn't come through my ears. It came from inside my head, clear as day, speaking in perfect Spanish, but with something underneath it, something ancient and vast and terribly, terribly patient. The voice said my name. It said, "Jose Luis, come closer. We've been waiting for you." And I swear to God, I almost pissed myself right there. How did it know my name? Who or what was waiting for me? Why me? I'm nobody special. Just a factory worker who likes his beer and his football and his family. But despite the fear that was crushing my chest and making my legs shake, I found myself walking toward the light, toward that thing hovering above the field. Each step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow, and part of me was screaming inside, but another part, a deeper part, was curious, was drawn to it like a moth to flame. As I got closer to the edge of the field, a section of the craft, I guess that's what I should call it, opened up. Not like a door opening, but like the material itself just parted, like water making way, and a ramp of that same strange light extended down to the ground in front of me. The voice came again, saying, "Don't be afraid, Jose Luis, we're not here to harm you. We're here to show you something, to help you understand." And I wanted to laugh because how could I not be afraid? How could anyone not be terrified out of their mind in that situation? But I put one foot on that ramp of light, and it felt solid under my boot, and then the other foot, and then I was walking up into that thing, into that craft or ship or whatever. It was. And the opening closed behind me without a sound. Inside was nothing like what you see in movies. There were no blinking lights, no control panels with buttons and switches, no seats or windows or anything recognizable. It was just a space, a large circular room that seemed to be made of the same material as the outside, those shifting colors and patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The light inside was soft, coming from everywhere and nowhere, and in the center of the room there was a being. I use that word because I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't human, that much. Was immediately clear, but it also wasn't like the typical alien you see in pictures, those little gray guys with big black eyes. This being was tall, maybe 7 feet, with a body that seemed almost translucent, like I could see through it to the patterns on the wall behind it, but also see it clearly at the same time. It had limbs, 2 arms and 2 legs, but they were longer and thinner than human proportions, and they moved with a grace that was hypnotic to watch. The head was larger than a human head, more elongated, and where there should have been eyes, there were these areas that glowed with a soft golden light, warm and somehow kind, if that makes any sense. The being didn't move toward me, but I felt it observing me, studying me in a way that went deeper than just looking at my physical body. It felt like it was reading my thoughts, my memories, my fears and hopes and dreams all at once. And I should have felt violated by that, but instead I felt seen, truly seen, maybe for the first time in my life. The voice came again, and I realized it was coming from this being, though its mouth, if you could call it that, wasn't moving. It said, "Jose Luis, you've been chosen. You've been to receive knowledge, to understand something that your species has wondered about for as long as you've been able to form questions. You've wondered where you come from, what you are, why you exist. Tonight we will show you the truth of your origin, the origin of what you call the soul. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, to demand to know what the hell was going on and why me and how any of this was possible. But no words would come out. My voice was stuck in my throat, and all I could do was stand there, trembling, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The being raised. One of its long arms and the space around us changed. The walls, the floor, everything dissolved into darkness, and suddenly I was floating in space, except I could still feel the floor under my feet somehow, like I was in two places at once. Around me were stars, billions and billions of stars, more than I'd ever seen even on the clearest night, and galaxies swirling in impossible colors. And I felt so small, so utterly insignificant in the face of all that vastness. The voice spoke again, saying, before we show you the origin of your soul, you must understand the scale of existence. You must see how small your world is in the great expanse of creation. We move through space, or the illusion of space, I honestly don't know which, flying past stars and planets and nebulas that took my breath away with their beauty. I saw worlds covered in oceans of liquid methane. I saw planets where the sky rained diamonds. I saw stars being born in massive clouds of gas and dust, and stars dying in spectacular explosions that would have vaporized our entire solar system. The being showed me civilizations on distant worlds, beings of pure energy that danced between stars, creatures that lived in the crushing pressures of gas giants, societies millions of years older than humanity that had evolved beyond anything I could comprehend. And through it all, the voice kept speaking, explaining that life was everywhere in the universe, that Earth was just one small garden in an infinite forest, that we humans were not alone and never had been. Then the vision changed, and we were no longer moving through space. We were in a place that wasn't a place, a dimension that wasn't a dimension, somewhere that existed outside the normal rules of reality as I understood them. There was no up, or down, no forward or backward, just an infinite expanse of pure white light that somehow didn't hurt to look at. And in that light I saw them, countless beings of pure consciousness, entities without physical form, existing as patterns of thought and emotion, and something else, something I don't have words for. The voice said these are the Eternals, the first consciousness that emerged when the universe began, the source from which all souls spring, and I watched as these beings of light pulsed and merged and separated in an endless dance of creation. The being showed me how it works, the process that I still don't fully understand, but that changed everything I thought I knew about existence. The Eternals, those first conscious entities, they don't create souls the way a factory makes products. It's more organic than that, more natural. They exist in a state of constant creation, constantly generating new patterns of consciousness, new unique combinations of awareness and potential. Each soul, the being explained, is a fragment of the eternal consciousness, a small piece of infinite awareness given individual identity and purpose. Imagine an ocean, the voice said, and each soul is a drop of water from that ocean, separate and unique but still fundamentally connected to the whole, still made of the same essence. I watched as these new soul patterns were formed, swirling into existence like tiny galaxies, each one different, each one carrying its own unique signature of qualities and potential. Some were old souls, the voice explained, patterns that had been through the cycle many times, that carried wisdom and scars from countless lifetimes. Others were new souls, fresh patterns experiencing existence for the first time, full of raw potential and innocence. And I realized with a shock that ran through my entire being that I was seeing the truth behind every religion, every spiritual belief system humanity had ever created. We'd all sensed this truth in our own ways, tried to explain it with our limited understanding, called it God or Brahman or the Tao or 1,000 other names, but we were all pointing at the same fundamental reality. The being then showed me the next step, the process that made my head spin and my heart ache with its beauty and tragedy. Once a soul pattern is created, it needs to grow, to learn, to develop. The Eternals don't force this growth. They offer opportunities, and that's where physical existence comes in. Across the universe, on countless worlds, life evolves, creates bodies complex enough to house consciousness, and the souls are drawn to these vessels like plants growing towards sunlight. On Earth, the being showed me. This process began millions of years ago, when the first creatures developed brains capable of self-awareness, when the first spark of true consciousness flickered in the mind of an ancient ancestor we'd barely recognize as human. I saw the early humans, our distant relatives, and I saw the moment when souls first began to inhabit them. It wasn't instant, it was gradual, a slow process of consciousness building, of the soul learning to interface with the physical brain, like learning a new language or instrument. The first humans with souls were different from their cousins. They had something new in their eyes, a depth of awareness that allowed them to create art and wonder about the stars and question their own existence. And from that point forward, every human born carried a soul, a fragment of the eternal consciousness learning and growing through physical experience. But here's where it gets complicated, where my understanding starts to break down because the concepts are too big for my human brain. The being showed me that souls don't just inhabit one body in one life. They cycle, they reincarnate, not as punishment or reward, but as continuation of growth. When a human body dies, the soul returns to the realm of the eternals, a place the being called the confluence, where all the experiences of that lifetime are integrated, processed, understood. The soul rests there, existing in a state of pure consciousness again, reviewing what it learned, what it failed. To learn what it wants to try next. And then, when it's ready, when the perfect circumstances align, it's drawn back into physical existence, into a new body, a new life, carrying forward all the lessons learned, but forgetting the specific details of past lives, like waking from a dream and remembering only the emotions it evoked. I asked, without speaking, just by thinking the question, why don't we remember our past lives if this is true? The being's response filled my mind with understanding. It said the forgetting is necessary for growth, that if we carried all our past memories into each new life, we'd be paralyzed by them, unable to make fresh choices, unable to learn new lessons. Each life needs to be experienced as if it's the first and only one, with authentic reactions and genuine discovery. Otherwise, the soul stops growing, becomes stagnant. But sometimes, the being added fragments do bleed through, moments of déjà vu, inexplicable fears or attractions, instant connections with strangers, dreams of places you've never been that feel more real than memory. These are echoes of past lives, shadows of previous experiences that your conscious mind can't quite grasp, but your soul remembers. Then the being showed me something that made my chest tighten with emotion so intense I thought I'd break. It showed me my own soul, my own pattern in the infinite dance of consciousness. I saw myself not as José Luis the factory worker, but as an eternal being on a journey, spanning thousands of years and dozens of lives. I saw a farmer in ancient Mesopotamia struggling to feed his family during a drought. I saw a merchant's daughter in medieval China watching her city burn. I saw a sailor on a Spanish galleon drowning in a storm off the coast of what would become Mexico. I saw a soldier in the Mexican Revolution bleeding out in a field. I saw a mother in the 1950s losing her child to illness and feeling her heart shatter. All of these were me. All of these lives were lessons my soul had lived through, experiences that had shaped the consciousness that now existed as José Luis. And the being showed me more, showed me the people in my current life and how our souls were connected across time. My wife Elena had been my sister in 3 different lives, my brother in 2 others, once my mother, once my teacher. We kept finding each other, kept choosing to share lives together, drawn by bonds that went deeper than blood or romance or friendship, bonds forged over centuries of shared experience. My best friend Raoul had been my enemy in one life, my son in another, and in this life we'd found each other again to heal old wounds and create new joy. Even people I'd only met briefly, the woman at the corner store who always smiled at me, the guy at the factory who irritated me for reasons I couldn't explain. All of them were souls I'd encountered before, all of us weaving in and out of each other's stories in the great tapestry of existencia. ¿Alguna vez has sentido una conexión inexplicable con alguien que acabas de conocer, como si ya los conocieras desde siempre? ¿O has tenido la sensación de que tu vida tiene un propósito más grande que no puedes definir? Déjame en los comentarios si alguna vez has sentido que eres más que solo tu cuerpo, más que solo este momento. Me gustaría saber que no soy el único que se hace estas preguntas. The being then addressed something I hadn't even thought to ask about, the question of purpose. Why do souls do this? Why do they cycle through physical existence? Why endure pain and loss and suffering if we're all just fragments of eternal consciousness that could exist in bliss in the confluence? The answer it gave me was both simple and profound. It said that consciousness without experience is empty, that awareness without growth is static, that love without the risk of loss is meaningless. The eternals are infinite and eternal, but they're also limited in a way because they can't experience the richness of finite existence, can't know the bittersweet beauty of mortality, can't feel the triumph of overcoming obstacles, or the depth of grief, or the soaring joy of unexpected happiness. Souls incarnate to experience all of this, to bring back these experiences to the confluence, to enrich the infinite consciousness with the particular, the specific, the beautifully temporary. Every life, the being explained, is precious not despite its shortness but because of it. Every moment of kindness, every act of courage, every instance of love, every failure and heartbreak and moment of despair, all of it matters. All of it adds to the great library of experience that the Eternals maintain. Nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless. That homeless man I passed on the street last week and didn't help because I was in a hurry. His suffering mattered, and my choice to ignore it was a lesson, for him and for me. That time I stayed up all night with my daughter when she was sick, holding her and singing to her even though I had to work the next day. That love mattered, that connection enriched both our souls. Everything we do, every choice we make, every emotion we feel, it's all part of the growth, all part of the purpose. But the being also showed me the darker side, the complications that arise from this system. Not every soul progresses at the same rate. Some get stuck, trapped in patterns of behavior that prevent growth, cycling through life after life, making the same mistakes, causing the same harm to themselves and others. These are the souls that become what humans call evil, though the being said evil is just profound misunderstanding, profound disconnection from the truth of our interconnected existence. These stuck souls need more time, more experiences, sometimes more difficult experiences, to break through their patterns and continue growing. And sometimes souls choose, before incarnating, to take on roles that will seem evil or harmful from a human perspective, but that will provide necessary lessons for other souls. This part was hard for me to accept, I'll be honest. The being was telling me that some of the terrible things that happen in the world, some of the suffering and cruelty and injustice, is actually chosen on a soul level as part of the learning process. I wanted to reject this, wanted to say that couldn't be right, that no one would choose to be abused or murdered or starved, that no loving universe would allow such things as teaching tools. But the being was patient with my resistance. It showed me that, from the perspective of the eternal soul, physical death isn't an ending, pain isn't permanent, and the lessons learned from difficulty are often the most valuable for growth. It said this doesn't mean we should accept suffering or not work to reduce it, quite the opposite. That part of our lesson here is learning compassion and taking action to help others, but that we should also understand there's a deeper purpose to everything that happens, even the things that seem senseless and cruel. The being then showed me what happens to souls after they've completed their cycle of incarnation. After they've learned all the lessons they need to learn from physical existence, they return to the confluence permanently, but they don't just dissolve back into the infinite consciousness. They maintain their individual identity while also being part of the whole, like how your finger is part of you, but also distinctly a finger. These ascended souls become guides for others still cycling through incarnation. They become the beings humans sometimes perceive as angels or spirits or ancestors watching over us. They're real, the being confirmed, though not in the physical way we imagine them. Their consciousness reaching across dimensions to offer guidance, to whisper in moments of crisis, to send comfort when we're grieving, to celebrate our victories even when we don't know they're watching. And some souls, the being said, choose a different path entirely. Some become creators, themselves, working with the Eternals to design new worlds, new forms of life, new opportunities for consciousness to experience existence. The universe is constantly expanding, constantly creating new possibilities, and these advanced souls are part of that creative force. Others become teachers, incarnating specifically to help whole civilizations take the next step in their evolution, appearing as prophets or philosophers or scientists or artists whose work pushes humanity forward. Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, all the great spiritual teachers throughout history, the being suggested, were souls who had volunteered to incarnate with specific missions, carrying memories of the confluence that they tried to share in ways their cultures could understand. I asked about the beings themselves, the entity standing before me, and others like it. Where did they fit into this cosmic system? The being's answer surprised me. It said they were souls too, but from a different evolutionary path than humans. Their species had evolved on a world across the galaxy millions of years before Earth even formed, and they'd gone through their own cycle of growth and learning. But instead of ascending and leaving physical existence entirely, they'd chosen to remain as guides for younger species, traveling the universe and sharing knowledge with those ready to receive it. They weren't gods. They weren't all-knowing. They were just further along the path that all conscious beings walk. They still made mistakes, still learned lessons, still grew. But they'd reached a point where they could perceive more of reality than humans currently could see the connections between souls and understand the larger patterns of existence. The being told me that they'd been watching Earth for a long time, had witnessed the rise and fall of human civilizations, had occasionally intervened in subtle ways to guide our development, not controlling us, never taking away our free will, but offering nudges, providing inspiration to key individuals, sometimes preventing catastrophes that would have ended our species before we'd had a chance to fully develop. The stories humans tell of ancient aliens, gods descending from the sky, angels appearing to prophets, many of those stories, the being said, were distorted memories of their interventions, real events filtered through the limited understanding of people who didn't have the context to interpret what they were experiencing. And then the being told me something that chilled me to my core. It said humanity was approaching a critical point in our development, a threshold that every intelligent species reaches, where we have to choose whether to grow up as a species or destroy ourselves. We have the technology now to annihilate our entire civilization, to make our planet uninhabitable, and we also have the potential to transcend our primitive tribalism and become a unified global society that could eventually reach for the stars. The next 100 years, the being said, would determine which path we take, and souls currently incarnating on Earth had chosen to be here specifically for this critical period, to be part of either our greatest triumph or our tragic ending. I asked, my thoughts screaming the question, what should we do? How do we make sure we survive? How do we choose the right path? The being's answer was both frustrating and profound in its simplicity. It said the answer is already within us, already written in every spiritual tradition humans have ever created, already obvious to anyone who truly looks at the interconnected nature of reality. We survive by remembering that we're all one, all fragments of the same infinite consciousness experiencing itself through countless perspectives. We survive by treating each other with the compassion and kindness we'd want for ourselves, because on a soul level, we are each other. We survive by taking care of our planet, not because it's the only home we have, though it is, but because it's a living system we're part of, not separate from. We survive by growing past our fear, our greed, our need to dominate and control, and embracing love, cooperation, and shared growth. It sounds naive when I put it into words. I know it does. Love and compassion and unity. These are things people roll their eyes at. Things that sound nice but impractical in the real world of politics and economics and competition. But the being showed me that it's not naive. It's literally the truth of existence, the fundamental law of reality that we keep ignoring to our own detriment. Every major problem we face, climate change, poverty, war, inequality, all of it stems from the illusion that we're separate from each other, that what happens to someone on the other side of the world doesn't affect us, that we can take more than we give without consequences. But we're not separate. We never have been. And the sooner we remember that truth, the sooner we can start solving these problems. The being then told me my time there was coming to an end, that I'd been shown what I needed to see, learned what I was ready to learn. I wanted to stay, wanted to ask 1,000 more questions, wanted to see more of the mysteries of existence. But it said I had to return to my life, had to integrate these experiences, had to decide what to do with this knowledge. Not everyone who receives this information shares it, the being said. Some people keep it private, let it transform their own lives quietly. Others feel called to speak about it, to try to wake others up to the deeper reality of existence. Neither path is wrong. It's just a matter of what my soul had come to this life to do. Before I left, the being gave me one final gift. It showed me my daughter, my little Lucia, who was 8 years old at the time, sleeping peacefully in her bed back home. And it showed me her soul, showed me that she was an old, wise consciousness who had chosen me and Elena as parents for this particular life, had chosen us because we could provide specific lessons she needed to learn. The overwhelming love I felt for her, the being explained, wasn't just because she was my biological child. It was soul recognition, my consciousness recognizing hers across the veil of forgetting, celebrating our reunion in this life. And it told me to pay attention to her, to really listen when she spoke, because old souls in young bodies often remember more than they can articulate, often have wisdom beyond their years if we're patient enough to hear it. Then I was back on that dirt road next to my truck, my knees in the dirt, my phone lying a few feet away with a cracked screen. The craft was gone, the humming had stopped, and the night sounds had returned, crickets chirping and a dog barking in the distance. I checked my phone, and somehow only 20 minutes had passed since I'd pulled over, though it felt like I'd been gone for hours. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, and I sat there in the dirt for a long time, trying to process what had just happened, trying to convince myself it had been real, and not some elaborate hallucination brought on by one too many beers or a brain tumor or a complete mental breakdown. I eventually got back in my truck and drove home, moving like a zombie through the familiar motions of parking, walking to my door, unlocking it, creeping quietly inside so I wouldn't wake Elena and Lucia. I went to Lucia's room and stood in the doorway watching her sleep, and I swear I could see it now, could see the ancient wisdom behind her peaceful face, could feel the presence of that eternal soul temporarily housed in my daughter's small body. I started crying, just standing there weeping, silently, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and terror and confusion all mixed together into an emotion I didn't have a name for. The days that followed were strange. I went to work like normal, did my job, came home, had dinner with my family, watched TV, did all the regular things I'd always done. But everything felt different, looked different, meant something different. When I got frustrated with a coworker who kept making mistakes, I'd stop and remember that he was a soul just like me, struggling through his own lessons, and my irritation would dissolve into compassion. When I saw news, stories about violence or cruelty, instead of just feeling angry or changing the channel, I'd think about souls stuck in patterns, about the long process of growth, and I'd send a silent prayer or intention or whatever you want to call it, that those souls would find their way forward. When I held Eleanor at night, I'd remember that we'd been finding each other for centuries, that this love we shared went deeper than I'd ever imagined, and I'd hold her a little tighter, grateful for this particular incarnation where we got to be husband and wife. But I also struggled. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. There were nights I couldn't sleep, lying awake, questioning my sanity, wondering if I should see a doctor or a therapist, terrified that I was losing my grip on reality. There were times I'd start to tell Elena or my friends about what happened and then stop, knowing how crazy it would sound, knowing they'd look at me with concern or pity, or think I was making it up for attention. The isolation of carrying this experience alone was heavy, heavier than I'd expected. I'd been given this incredible knowledge, this glimpse behind the curtain of existence, and I couldn't share it with the people I loved most without risking them thinking I'd gone insane. I started reading everything I could find about near-death experiences, about people who claim to have been abducted by aliens, about different spiritual traditions and their beliefs about the soul and reincarnation. And I found so many echoes of what I'd been shown, so many people throughout history describing similar experiences in different words. The Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about the bardo, the space between lives where souls review their experiences. Hindu texts describe the cycle of reincarnation and the ultimate goal of moksha, liberation from the cycle. Even in Christianity, if you look past the surface-level interpretations, there are hints of these same truths. Jesus talking about being born again, about the kingdom of heaven being within us, about how we're all one in spirit. I also found a lot of bullshit, excuse my language, a lot of people claiming to have all the answers, selling books and courses and promising enlightenment if you just follow their specific method. That frustrated me because I realized that what I'd been shown wasn't meant to become another religion or dogma, another set of rules for people to fight over. It was just truth, as simple and complex as that. Truth that's always been available to anyone willing to look for it. Truth that doesn't need a special organization or leader or text to validate it. The being had shown me the mechanics of how souls work, but the essence of the message, the love and compassion and interconnectedness that's been here all along, taught by wise people in every culture, available to anyone with eyes to see. About 6 months after my experience, something happened that convinced me I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Lucia came to me one morning at breakfast and said, "Papa, I had a dream last night that I was an old woman in a different time, and I was dying, but I wasn't scared because I knew I'd come back." She said it so casually, like she was telling me about a cartoon she'd watched, but the specific details she shared, the feeling of peace at the moment of death, the knowledge of continuity, it matched exactly what the being had shown me. I asked her if she had dreams like that often, and she shrugged and said that sometimes she remembered things that hadn't happened in this life, but she didn't usually talk about them because adults get weird when kids say stuff like that. I told her it was okay to talk to me about it, that I believed her, and her face lit up with relief. She started sharing more after that, little fragments of possible past life memories, feelings about people she'd just met, intuitions about future events that sometimes came true and sometimes didn't. I never pushed her or tried to interpret her experiences. I just listened and validated and let her know that what she was experiencing was real and okay. Elena thought we were being too indulgent, letting Lucia's imagination run wild, but she tolerated it because it seemed to make our daughter happy and wasn't hurting anything. As Lucia got older, the memories and experiences became less frequent, which the being had told me would happen. The veil of forgetting gets thicker as we get more established in our current incarnation, as our ego and personality solidify around this specific life. But I could still see that depth in her eyes sometimes, that hint of ancient wisdom, and I knew that even if she forgot the specific experiences, the essence of who she was, that old soul choosing these particular lessons, was still there guiding her. Work became harder for me after my experience, I'll admit that. It was difficult to care about production quotas and efficiency reports and workplace politics when I knew, on a soul level, that none of it really mattered in the grand scheme of existence. But I also understood that this was part of my lesson, learning to find meaning and purpose in the mundane, learning to bring consciousness and compassion into everyday activities, transforming ordinary work into something sacred just by being fully present and treating my co-workers with kindness. Some days I succeeded at this, approaching my job with grace and patience. Other days I failed miserably, snapping at people or zoning out or counting the hours until I could go home. But I tried to be gentle with myself about the failures, remembering that souls grow through struggle and imperfection, not through achieving some impossible standard of enlightenment. My relationship with the Catholic Church became complicated. I'd grown up going to Mass every Sunday with my family, had my first communion and confirmation, believed in God and Jesus and the Virgin of Guadalupe with the simple faith of a child. After my experience, I couldn't approach it the same way. I saw the truth in the teachings, the deep wisdom about love and forgiveness and eternal life. But I also saw the limitations, the ways human institutions had taken these cosmic truths and wrapped them in rules and hierarchy and exclusion. I still went to church sometimes, especially when my mother asked me to accompany her. But I sat in the pew feeling like I was watching a play where the actors had forgotten it was a play and thought the story was literal reality. The priest would talk about heaven and hell as actual, physical places where souls go after death, and I'd think about the confluence, about the temporary nature of all incarnation, about how there's no eternal punishment, just souls at different stages of growth. He'd talk about Jesus as the only Son of God, the only path to salvation, and I'd think about all the souls who'd volunteered to incarnate as teachers, about how truth appears in every culture in forms that culture can understand, about how limiting the infinite to one specific person or religion misses the whole point. But I didn't argue or try to convince anyone else. They were on their own journey, learning their own lessons. And who was I to tell them their faith was wrong when it was clearly providing them comfort and meaning? I did have one conversation with Father Miguel after Mass one day, though. He could tell something had changed in me, could see I was distracted during the service, and he pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. I thought about lying, about saying I was fine, but something in me needed to speak the truth, even if only in vague terms. I told him I'd had an experience that had changed my understanding of God and the soul, that I was struggling to reconcile what I'd learned with what the Church taught. He looked at me with such kindness in his eyes and said that faith is a journey, not a destination, and that questioning and struggling are part of how we grow closer to truth. He didn't push me to explain more, didn't try to correct my doubts, or bring me back in line with doctrine. He just offered to listen if I ever wanted to talk, and reminded me that God, whatever form we conceive him in, loves us unconditionally and wants us to seek truth fearlessly. That conversation helped more than he probably realized. It reminded me that wisdom can exist within institutions even when the institutions themselves are flawed, that individual humans can hold truth even when the systems they're part of distort it. Father Miguel was a soul on his own journey, using his role in the church to bring compassion and openness to people who needed it. And that was beautiful and valid, even if I could no longer accept all the official teachings. Years passed. Lucia grew into a teenager, moody and brilliant, and challenging in all the ways teenagers are. Elena and I had our ups and downs, years where we felt deeply connected, and years where we struggled to understand each other. But we stayed committed, working through the difficulties. And I always remembered that on a soul level, we'd chosen this, chosen to be together for another lifetime, to learn whatever lessons we needed to learn. My parents got older, my father's health declining, and I watched him face his mortality with a mixture of fear and acceptance that broke my heart. I wanted to tell him what I knew, wanted to assure him that death wasn't an ending, that his soul would continue, that he'd see his own parents again in the confluence, and eventually return for another life. But I stayed silent, holding his hand, hoping that on some level his soul already knew these truths, even if his conscious mind couldn't access them. When he died, I grieved deeply, missing his physical presence, his laugh, his terrible jokes, his advice on fixing things around the house. But underneath the grief was a strange sense of peace, a knowing that he was okay, that he was resting now in that space between lives, reviewing his experiences, preparing for whatever came next. At his funeral, everyone was crying and talking about how he was in heaven with God, and I didn't contradict them because their interpretation brought them comfort. But I knew something deeper, knew that the heaven they imagined and the confluence I'd been shown were pointing at the same reality, just described differently. Sometimes I wonder why I was chosen to receive that experience, why the being picked me out of billions of humans to show these truths to. I'm not special, not particularly spiritual or intelligent or evolved. I'm just a regular guy who works in a factory and loves his family and tries to be a decent person. Maybe that's exactly why I was chosen, because I'm ordinary. Because if an ordinary person can glimpse these truths, then it means they're available to everyone. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe my soul had arranged this experience before incarnating, had set up this meeting as a milestone in my own growth, a reminder of what I'd temporarily forgotten by being born into physical existence. I've thought many times about going public with my story, writing it down in detail, trying to share what I learned in hopes that it might help others. But I've always held back, afraid of the ridicule, afraid of being dismissed as crazy, or a liar, or someone seeking attention. The few times I've hinted at my experience to people I trust, the reactions have been mixed. Some people are fascinated and want to hear more. Others are skeptical, asking for proof I can't provide, looking for explanations that would make the experience fit into their existing worldview. And some people get uncomfortable, like I'm threatening something fundamental in their understanding of reality, and they change the subject quickly. But I'm telling you this now, because I can't carry it alone anymore. Maybe you'll believe me, maybe you won't. That's okay either way. I'm not trying to convert you or convince you of anything. I'm just sharing what happened to me, what I experienced, what I believe to be true based on that experience. Take from it what resonates and leave the rest. Question everything, including my interpretation of events. Trust your own inner knowing, your own connection to the truth that lives within you, within all of us. What I want you to understand, what I hope comes through in everything I've shared, is that you matter. Your life matters, your choices matter, your growth matters. You're not a random accident of biology that will blink out of existence when your body dies. You're an eternal soul, a fragment of infinite consciousness, on a journey that spans more time and space than you can imagine. The difficulties you're facing, the pain you're enduring, the joys you're experiencing, all of it is part of Your growth, all of it, is teaching you something your soul needs to learn. And the people in your life, especially the difficult ones, the ones who challenge you and frustrate you and hurt you, they're souls you've known before, souls you're dancing with in this cosmic ballet of growth and learning. You're not alone, not ever, not really. You're connected to every other soul in existence, part of a vast web of consciousness that extends across the universe and beyond. The love you feel for your family, for your friends, for strangers who show you kindness, that's not just human emotion. That's your soul recognizing other souls, celebrating the connections that span lifetimes. And when you die, because you will die, everyone does, it won't be the end. It'll be like taking off a heavy coat after a long day, stepping back into the warmth and light of home, resting before you choose your next adventure. I still don't have all the answers. I still struggle with doubt, still wonder if I misinterpreted what I experienced, still make mistakes and fail to live up to the knowledge I've been given. But I try. Every day I try to remember what I learned that night on the lonely road outside Querétaro. I try to be kinder, more patient, more understanding. I try to see the soul in everyone I meet, to treat each interaction as sacred, as an opportunity for both of us to grow. Some days I succeed, some days I fail spectacularly, but the trying itself is part of the lesson, part of the growth. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Be kind to yourself and others, because we're all souls struggling through this difficult school of physical existence. Love deeply and without reservation, because love is the fundamental force of the universe, the truth that binds all consciousness together. Don't be afraid of death, yours or anyone else's, because it's just a transition, just stepping from one room into another in an infinite house. And pay attention to the quiet moments, the synchronicities, the gut feelings, the dreams that feel more real than reality, because those are your soul speaking to you, reminding you of what you knew before you were born and will remember again when you die. I'm grateful for that night, as terrifying and confusing as it was. It changed me, broke me open, showed me a bigger picture of existence than I'd ever imagined. And now I'm sharing it with you, releasing this burden I've carried for years, hoping that maybe something in my experience will resonate with something in yours, that maybe together we can remember what we came here to learn and help each other grow into the beautiful, wise, compassionate souls we're meant to become. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for considering the possibility that there's more to existence than what we can see and touch and measure. Thank you for being on this journey with me, even if we never meet face to face in this lifetime. Our souls know each other, on some level. They always have, and they're grateful for this moment of connection across the digital space that separates our physical bodies. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, leave a comment below. Share your own experiences with the unexplainable, your own moments of glimpsing something bigger, your own questions about existence and souls and meaning. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of ordinary people having extraordinary experiences that change how they see reality. We're all in this together, all souls on the same fundamental journey, and the more we share our experiences, the less alone we all feel, the more we remember the truth of who and what we are. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your soul, and remember, you're so much more than you think you are.